This July, we're taking life seriously. Cardiac arrest is scary and more common than you might think. Did you know that every year nearly 9 million people will experience a cardiac event outside of hospital? Would you know what to do? I'm Australian actor Steve Bastoni, and I'm urging everyone to learn CPR as part of our Don't Die July campaign. Visit don'tdiejuly.com and sign up today, because you can't put a price on life.
Critically analyzing global affairs. The Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn. And here on the Muckrakers, we pledge to continue tackling the most pressing and controversial news issues of our time, shining more light and less heat on our unquavering quest to find the truth. We don't just ask the questions, but we question those answers. I'm joined today by the wonderful James. Welcome back, James. It's good to see you.
Hello, Andrew. It seems like we were just together yesterday.
But yesterday we were talking about your favourite person, good old Ursula, and you predicted it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like many people, I would like to see her gone. Although there is a worry about who would replace her if we did get rid of her. But I think it was clear to me that she was always going to get re-elected because, look, the EU has got some big existential problems at the moment. One of them being what's going on in France with the political uncertainty there. But I think bigger than that is the dilemma for Europe about how it pivots to a Trump administration and the fact that it'll totally turn on policy on Ukraine. So I think if they got rid of Ursula yesterday, it would have been absolute chaos in the EU. So I think it was like a sword of Damocles hanging over MEPs. They knew damn well. And also the other thing to mention is, of course, the EU Council leaders, European leaders from countries across the EU. They all wanted Ursula back in. So there would have been a lot of pressure on MEPs via their political parties to make sure that she got back in. And she did actually increase her well, it's not her majority, is it? Because it's not really an election. She was the only person on the ballot paper, but she did increase her vote score. She got 52% when I was an MEP and voted against her, and she increased that to 58%. So
wow.
So yeah, interesting times.
Well, it's that ringing endorsement that you gave her on the Muckrakers yesterday. I think that obviously helped increase the vote by according numbers. But we touted a few of the names that if she didn't make it, that may well replace her. And it's worth going back, go check out TNT's site, more platforms than Paddington, and listen to that episode. Now, another thing that's happening around the world today is there's major IT outages. They're hitting industries across the world with airlines, broadcasters and supermarkets affected. Microsoft says it's taking mitigation action, but the cause of the outlet hasn't been confirmed yet, the outage, although some people thought it might be something to do with an updated software or whatever. It does make us realise, though, James, just how dependent we are on technology. And when it fails, the whole thing just goes to pot, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is actually quite scary. The prospects of the internet going down, obviously this has just affected certain companies and certain services. But can you imagine if the internet went down, not just for a couple of hours, but maybe for a week? I mean, a whole society would be at peril because, these days, even food, everything is delivered using just-in-time distribution methods. There would be chaos. especially within the cities, where transport wouldn't work. You wouldn't be able to buy anything. People would be out looting within a couple of days. It would be absolute chaos. So I think it is quite scary in the modern world how dependent we are on the internet. But of course, the other thing to mention with this as well is, of course, governments around the world want to bring in digital ID combined with CBDCs, and they want to get rid of cash. That's clear. I'm sure that will be a policy put forward by the Labour government as we approach 2030 and, of course, Agenda 2030 with the United Nations. This is just another bit of evidence on why we should not be going down that road. There's lots of reasons, obviously, about freedoms and etc. But just in terms of practicality, can you imagine if payment systems went down for more than just a couple of hours and people couldn't get food? They couldn't get petrol. I mean, literally, society would come to a halt very, very quickly. And of course, in these times when, we're at war with Russia, there's a war on the horizon, potentially with China. Obviously, the advent of cyber attacks becomes more prevalent. So these are real risks. And I think it's just another argument for why we should not get rid of cash.
No, you're absolutely right. And I always, you've got to do both in parallel, don't you? I mean, well, I speak around the world, as you know, as a futurist and predict what's going to happen with technology. And I always emphasize the point. I mean, things like AI, it's our greatest human achievement, but also potentially our biggest existential threat. We have to understand the limitations and seeing the disruption caused. I mean, broadcasters have been taken off air, some of the major ones, but TNT is still here fighting for the truth, which has got to be something good. I think somebody's looking, just as they looked after Donald Trump, they're looking after TNT as well, don't you think?
I think they are. I'd agree with you there, Andrew.
So what I want to do today is have a closer look at the King's speech and the various policies that Starmer introduced. We may or may not be joined by Charlie Mullins, who, as you know, is an entrepreneur, media commentator, columnist, and founder of Pimlico Plumbers. He's the archetypal entrepreneur. He started Pimlico Plumbers from scratch in 1979 and built it into a multi-million-pound enterprise, which he sold in 2021 for more than 140 million. Enough for your lunch account there. Charlie's also launching a new family business, WeFix, and already has former staff members who are beating down the door asking for jobs. So hopefully Charlie will join us a little bit later to talk about the government's plans and particularly how it affects business, because he said before the election that if Starmageddon happened, he would leave the UK and probably set up in Spain or Dubai, but still carry on with his new company. So an interesting thing. Have you met Charlie before? Have you dealt with him?
Oh, no, I haven't, no, but I'm aware of Charlie.
And I'd be very interested to hear his views, because we've also had the COVID initial report come out. And I know a lot of people have very strong opinions on that and requiring workers to take jabs and so on and so forth. So hopefully he'll come on to that. Let's look a bit more than at Starmer's speech. He basically said his mission is going to be based on principles of security, fairness and opportunity for all, and having a dig, if you like, at Liz Truss's extraordinary budget that time. He says everything is going to be sort of checked in accordance with fiscal rules, so they don't have these massive, basically scare, if you like. What was your general overview of his particular plans?
Yeah, I think Labour are going to have quite a short honeymoon period, despite the fact that they've got a large majority. It's clear from the election, any kind of sensible analysis of it anyway, that Labour didn't win a huge majority. The Conservatives lost the election and gave it to Labour. I mean, look, if you look at the figures, Starmer did just very, very slightly better than Corbyn did, back in 2019. So I think the honeymoon period will be short. And it's clear the naivety when you look at some of the policies, because I think, there's a number of policies where you can see the battle is going to be between Labour's claimed objectives and the policies that it is actually talking about bringing in. So on the one hand, Starmer's talking about generating economic growth. But Ed Miliband, meanwhile, while Starmer's out of the country, is talking about all of these net zero policies, getting rid of prime farmland, putting solar panels there, but also these North Sea exploration oil licenses that he's talking about getting rid of. I mean, how can you get economic growth if you get rid of the cheap energy that the UK has access to. So the other one is, like I said, food security. They talk about that, but then they're putting up solar and wind farms on prime agricultural land. Increased trade union rights is another one that I think could impact economic growth. We've seen over the past couple of years NHS doctors asking and striking for a 30% pay rise, which is just absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that these strikes have been going on, no doubt will have impacted NHS waiting lists, which of course, if you're unwell and you're off work, well, that hurts economic growth. So I think, there's lots of other examples as well. The Cass review, for example, Labour promised to implement all of the findings from the Cass review. And yet in the King's speech, it's talking about banning conversion therapy, which is going to put the frighteners up, counsellors, teachers, anybody who deals with young people, because they're going to be absolutely frightened about doing anything apart from just affirming kids' belief that they're born in the wrong body when actually they really need help, So lots of contradictory messages coming out of Labour. So like I said, I think that honeymoon period is going to be very, very short for them.
I always find in politics, it goes the same sort of pattern, doesn't it? There's that wonderful hope. You have a period of depression and people are basically then voting for what they hope will bring them a new era of prosperity and so on and so forth. And that's certainly what Labour promised. They're talking about change, and Sunak was basing it all on fear, saying if you don't stick with us, the progress we're making will stop. But it always happens, doesn't it? People suddenly get all this hope and then it's going to be a crashing disappointment. But when you touched on this about the Corbyn era and how they actually did a lot better in the polls. And you look at people like Reform, who got a tremendous amount of the votes, but that didn't convert into seats. Do you think there's going to be a continued pressure to look at changing the rules? And if so, is that pressure going to mount to anything? Because I suspect not.
I suspect not, but it's an interesting one, actually, because, of course, the Labour Party at their conference, I think it was the last conference they had, they passed a motion saying that if they got into government, they would bring in proportional representation. Of course, now they've got that majority. You can see them, that's slipping down the list of priorities. So I don't think they're going to bring it in. I mean, this is the problem that we've got. It's a catch-22 because, when parties are in opposition, particularly if they haven't got many seats, they all want proportional representation. But as soon as they get that majority and get into government, well, it's not quite so attractive, is it? So it is a problem, but, it is a problem within the Labour Party for them to deal with, because many, many members, despite Labour getting into government, still believe that that is a policy we should go forward. And I totally think we should as well, because look, there's nothing more disengaging for democracy than people who feel that their vote doesn't count. And a big proportion of those 4.1 million actually Reform voters will feel, wow, 4.1 million of us, and yet we've got 5 MPs. So there's a huge argument. I think the other thing pointing towards the need to go for proportional representation is that first past the post really works well when you have 2 big parties, right? It works well then. But, we've seen a 17 percentage point drop between the 2019 election and this latest election in terms of the combined share of the Conservatives and Labour's share of votes. And if you look over time, you can see that proportion going down and down. So first past the post isn't a great system for a political environment where you've got lots of parties, and that's the way we're going. We've seen the Lib Dems increase their vote share and the number of seats they've got. The Greens always do fairly well versus the number of seats they get, and of course now we've got Reform, and I expect Reform to go from strength to strength. So there are huge arguments for the preservation of democracy, for encouraging people to vote in terms of doing it. But I suspect Labour won't do it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And it's shocking when you see the figures. First of all, apathy seems to have won more than anything. The turnout was much lower than it was in previous elections. But basically, Liberal Democrats got 12% of the votes, and that converted into 72 seats, whereas Reform, I think, got 14%, and that only converted into 5. It doesn't sound fair, does it? Anyway, we're going to have a quick break. After the break, we're going to be joined by Charlie Mullins. Stay where you are.
It's been said that when someone you love has Parkinson's, you have Parkinson's. The truth is, Parkinson's disease doesn't just affect the diagnosed. It affects everyone who supports and helps care for them. Worldwide, over 10 million people are living with Parkinson's, a neurological disease that affects movement. And with so many places to search for information, it can be difficult to know where to begin. The Parkinson's Foundation has answers. Answers for everyone in the fight. We can help you understand the disease, help you find expert care, give you tips for living a better life, share the latest research, help you find local support, and there's a free helpline you can call. Find your answers and join us in the fight against Parkinson's. To learn more, please go to parkinson.org or call 1-800-4PD-INFO. The Parkinson's Foundation. Better lives together.
A better business tip from TNT Radio. The benefits of advertising on today's news talk, TNT Radio, should be clear to businesses of any shape or size. It can be accessed anywhere, anytime, by anybody, and is the perfect way to build brand awareness and stimulate digital activity. If you'd like more information about advertising on TNT Radio, simply fill out your details on our contact page and we'll be in touch. To find out more, go to tntradio.live.
You're listening to the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Well, welcome back to the Muckrakers with me, Andrew Eborn, and also the wonderful James Freeman. And we've been looking at Europe. We've been having a big, deep dive into the interesting things that Keir Starmer has been saying and his plans now that he's got this massive majority. And very soon we might be joined by Charlie Mullins. There we go. Are we joined by Charlie now? We do. Hello, Charlie.
Hi, good morning or afternoon. I'm not sure what the time is.
Morning,
really,
afternoon, good evening. You're in Spain and the hamster wheels are working. I was just saying there's been this global outage as a result of a Microsoft issue, we understand, and airlines have collapsed, broadcasters have collapsed, all sorts of banking systems have collapsed, but TNT keeps on going, and now we've got the best plumber in the world. So well done, Charlie, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And it's a big problem out there, this IT problem, for sure. Disrupting the world.
It is one. James and I were just talking. Have you met James before? I should introduce you. This James Freeman, who's a former MEP and a great fan of Ursula.
Yeah, I'm not actually met.
Hi, Charlie.
Hi. It's all good stuff. What I want to look at, we were digging deep into Keir Starmer. We've heard the King's speech now. We had all the pomp and ceremony, which we do so well over here. And in his speech, he basically said, my government is committed to making work pay and will legislate to introduce a new deal for working people to ban exploitative practices and enhance employment rights. Now, I know you've got very strong views on this, Charlie. Tell me what you think.
Well, I actually think it's disastrous. I think, look, just to say that the King put the speech over very well, considering, where he is today. But the content of the speech was absolutely rubbish. A lot of it is a waste of time. And on a business point of view, I would say changing the employment law where workers have rights from day one, equivalent to someone who's been with you for 2 years, I would say that is commercial suicide. It's the worst decision in employment law this century. It will absolutely destroy businesses. Employers will be very, very careful who they take on. And I actually feel that the government's idea of creating wealth will actually have the opposite effect. There'll be less revenue coming in because of the change of the employment laws.
Yeah, and they talk about a new partnership between business, trade unions and working people. And they say that's fundamental to the growth. Your point, Charlie, is it's not going to work this way. Is that fair?
It's not going to work. I've spoken to many other business people, and some people now are even closing down their business immediately because of the new employment laws. He wants to bring in 4 day a week. He wants the employer the employees, to pick their own hours, it's going to be absolutely disastrous. And, probably 3 months from now will have an effect. I actually think it's going to put the UK in recession. All their money, all the government's money, comes from businesses, people that go to work. And this is just going to destroy it. You know yourself, sorry, Andrew, you know yourself, I said that if Labour get in, which was obvious, I would leave the UK. My residence there is in Spain. I'm no longer prepared to work under the current government. They are very anti-business. Not one of them that's in the cabinet have ever run their own business. They've been doing jobs that are not worried about profit and loss. Not one of them in the cabinet has had their own business. How can you have people that have not been in business trying to tell people how to run a business? I mean, obviously, I'm annoyed. I'm fuming about it, and many other people. But obviously, I've got to be relaxed on the conversation. But it's absolutely disgraceful what the Labour are going to do. We actually knew this was going to happen. Everybody knows they're anti-business. Everybody knows they're all about giving money away, but they can't bring any money in. They do not have a clue.
Interesting. James.
Yeah, it seems every few years we have a need to be reminded of what a Labour government does when in power. Look, I mean, I agree with Charlie. I think, putting an emphasis on working from home in particular, when we should be getting people back into the office now, I think that is dangerous. We've got lots of civil servants who are still refusing to go back into work, which is a real problem for productivity in the UK. The rights from day one, I'll agree with Charlie, but there are some good things in there as well. I think the end to fire and hire, I think, is a good thing. I mean, if you remember back to that example of P&O Ferries that sacked 800 workers via a video with immediate effect. And by the way, they'd already advertised their jobs a few weeks before. They got all the workers there to come in literally as they were firing the old set of workers. So I think that is the right thing to do. The other thing that I think is probably a good policy is on 0-hour contracts. Now, they can work for some workers, and I think they can work for some employers as well. And it's interesting that Labour have put exploitative 0 hours contracts rather than just saying 0-hour contracts, because I would like to see the exploitative bits taken out of the contracts, but 0-hour contracts remaining. Because like I said, I think for some businesses which have ebbs and flows in demand, which they can't predict, it actually works for them, and for some kind of workers as well. I mean, I've worked on 0-hour contracts when I was a student, and it really, really worked for me and the employer as well.
Just we're drinking from the same teapot on that one, and it suits many people, suits many employers, and it gets people motivated and gives them an opportunity to sort of expand. But sorry, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, Charlie. I mean, the only other thing I would comment on is this standardising minimum wages and taking it up to a living wage. What I'd like to see, and this is a much, much bigger question, rather than increasing minimum wage, I'd like to see the government actually getting big corporations to pay their fair share of tax. We've got Tesco's, all of the supermarkets. I'm going to pick on them, but there's lots of other corporations. And basically, they pay billions in dividends out to their shareholders, while a lot of their staff get working tax credits. That cannot be right, that the taxpayers are subsidising the profits of supermarkets. And of course, there's the wider question of the likes of Amazon still, even though that's been rumbling on for years, still not paying their fair share of taxes, yet they use our roads. People get educated through the school system to go and work there. And yet they've got these complicated tax systems, which means they hardly pay any tax at all. None of that from the Labour government, but I think that's no surprise, because they wouldn't have got into power if they'd not done deals behind closed doors.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, Yeah, the timing's interesting on this one as well, because the Toll Puddle Martyrs Festival is opening today, and obviously that all stemmed from basically people setting up trade unions and workers' rights and so on and so forth. You've got your new company, Charlie, WeFix. It's you've got lots of your former employees are knocking on your door saying we want to continue working with you and love to support your new venture. What's the deal with all your plumbers and other experts?
Okay, well, look, the new company is a family business. I won't be on the payroll, but obviously they will comply and pay all the taxes that they have to. My contribution will be obviously my experience over the last 40 years of running a very successful plumbing company. We need to sort out how we're going to employ people, whether we can, go into this self-employed thing, which gives you more motivated people. But at the moment, I think the government and the tax people have closing down every opportunity for people to earn more money and be successful. I'm not just talking about the owners of the business. I'm talking about staff and all. Many staff that worked for me before managed to buy their own house, have a wonderful life because they was on a self-employed basis, or the gig economy. Doing away with the gig economy will again affect our economy and will affect a lot of people. So I'm sorting out how we're going to go about the tax side of it or the employment side of it, but it's just made me more and more careful who I take on, because if you take someone on, how can you employ someone one day, give them a contract the same day, and then next day you don't feel they're up to standard, and you're already in a situation that if you get rid of them, you're going to have to be paying them money. It's just the craziest change in employment law I've ever known.
And what I find extraordinary, Charlie, is that the government must have consulted business leaders such as yourself about this, and presumably you made all those points then. What was their reaction when you raised these points?
Well, when it was with the Conservative government, they listened a little bit. They started to listen.